Hello, my young friends. The purpose of this video is to help you to prepare for the exam number 3. We're going to be covering the basic tools of finance, Islamic finance, and unemployment. Under finance, we understand that there are two foundations of finance, time and risk. They're really what we consider under finance. Let's consider time first. We have two things that we think about: what something's going to be worth in the future and what something in the future is going to be worth today, or the present value. The future value is basically what something today will be worth in the future. We can compute this by compounding a value. Present value is to determine what something in the future is actually worth today, and we do this with discounting. The formula that we use is just this simple formula. All finance really comes back to this formula: 1 plus r raised to the power of n, where r is the rate of compounding and n is the number of periods. Let's see how this works under compounding. There's our formula. This will allow us to calculate the future value of something. Discounting, on the other hand, is 1 divided by this formula, or the reciprocal. Remember, the reciprocal is just simply what we have to multiply in order to get 1. So discounting, we just are using that calculation as the denominator. With that formula, we can calculate the present value of a future value. In order to calculate the future value, we simply multiply the present value times this factor that we calculate, and that will give us the future value. To get the present value, we multiply the future value by this factor to get the present value. So we have these two formulas. Present value equals the future value times 1 over 1 plus r raised to the power of n, or the present value, we can also rewrite it simply as the future value divided by 1 plus r over n, raised to the power of n, excuse me. Two ways that we do that. All right, here's the way we could rewrite this. Future value is equal to the present value times the factor. The factor, once again, is 1 plus r raised to the power of n. We could rewrite this simply by dividing both sides by the factor. If we do that, we can cancel those two, and that would end up being the present value is equal to the future value divided by the factor, or the present value is the future value divided by the factor. These are the essential formulas that you need to understand for the basic finance chapter. Remember, the steps are pretty straightforward. We calculate the factor. You'll be given the r and the n, and then ask yourself, is this problem future value or present value? If it's future value, then we multiply the present value. So it would be the future value is equal to the present value times the factor that you've calculated. If we're trying to solve for present value, then we divide the future value by the factor. So the present value is equal to the future value divided by the factor. All right, so let's see how this would work in a couple of problems. The future value is equal to the present value times our factor. Let's assume we have a situation where the present value is 500 and r, the rate of compounding, is 5%, or 0.05, and the number of periods is 3. Can you calculate what the future value would be? Well, our first step would be to calculate the factor. In this case, it's 1 plus 0.05 raised to the power of 3, and that would be 1.2155. Our present value is 500, so it would be 500 times 1.2155. The result would be 607.75. So to think about this, if something, for example, weighed 500 kilograms a day and it was increasing at a rate of 5% a year, at the end of the third year it would weigh 607.75 kilograms. All right, let's think about a future value. Future value is calculated is equal to the present value times our factor. In this case, if the future value is 2,000 and we were increasing at 8%, or 0.08, and the number of periods was 5, what would the present value be? In other words, 5 years out, something is worth 2,000. What would it be worth today if we were to discount it at an 8% rate for 5 years? First of all, we calculate our factor. In this case, it's 1.4693. That's 1.08 raised to the power of 5. And then we would simply take 2,000 and divide by that factor. In this case, it would be 1361.61. In other words, we could think about as if we started with 1361.1 and it was increasing at 8% a year for 5 years. Into 5 years, the future value would be 2,000. Does that make sense? Okay, so you'll always be given the R and the N, the rate of increase and the number of periods. If it's present value, then we solve. If you're given the present value, then you need to solve for the future value. If you're given the future value, then you need to solve for the present value. You're always given R or N, and you'll be given either the present value. If you're given the present value, you solve for the future value. If you're given the future value, you've got to solve for the present value. Okay, so that's time. Let's talk about risk. Risk, most people don't like risk, and we call that risk adverse. They turn from risk. We understand that we cannot always avoid risk, but we can reduce our exposure to risk, and we do this a number of different ways. We call this generally diversification. Diversification is when we take one large risk and we replace it with lots of small unrelated risks. So we have a large risk, and the idea is to replace that large risk with a bunch of little small risks that aren't related to each other. That's what diversification really means. Insurance is a form of risk diversification or risk sharing. We're spreading that risk across a bunch of small members instead of assuming the risk all ourselves. It doesn't eliminate the risk, but it reduces our exposure to the size of the risk. How we fund an insurance pool is pretty straightforward. First of all, we estimate the size of the loss and then estimate the probability. And then the premium that we would have each person pay is the loss times the probability. And then the number of members in our insurance pool would be the size of the loss divided by the premium. So let's see how this would work. If the loss we estimate the loss at 100 and the probability is 1 in 20 or 0.05, the premium would be 100 times 0.05 or 5. Each person would put in 5. The number of members in your insurance pool would be that you'd have to have in order to fund the pool would be 100 divided by the premium or 20. You see how that works? All right, that's how we would fund an insurance pool. Adverse selection is an aspect of insurance. Under adverse selection, a person makes a bad choice due to asymmetric information. They don't have sufficient information or the same information that the other side of the transaction has. Consequently, they make a bad choice. The other thing that we remember in insurance is a moral hazard. Moral hazard is when someone changes their behavior after an agreement. They have this temptation to abuse the other party because of the structure of the agreement. There are 3 risks that we think about with a stock market. The first is firm risk, the second is the industry risk, and the third is market risk. The other thing that we also consider is a speculative bubble that occurs when the price is greater than the fundamental value. And it occurs in many cases because people are buying something because everybody else is buying it. So they want to get in on the buying streak, and it ends up pushing the price way above its fundamental value. And at some point, everybody realizes that that price doesn't make any sense, and that's when the bubble collapses. All right, I want to talk now about Islamic finance, chapter 28, a couple of terms there. Islamic finance, remember, you have to have an asset involved in the exchange. There's no situation where money is traded for money with any kind of a profit or interest. The thing that we must remember is Islamic finance is a profit loss sharing system. Under non-Islamic finance, it's based on interest, charging interest on money or rent on money, or riba. There's some key terms under Islamic finance we want to remember. Sharia is sacred law. Riba is usury or interest. Gharar is uncertainty or ambiguity. Haram is something that's prohibited. Halal is something that's permitted. Zakat is a religious tax, and a hiba is a gift. The way to think about this is we have a number of things to remember under deposits. There are 3 types of deposits for Islamic banks: current, savings, and investment. Equity financing, there are two different kinds of financing there. The Mudaraba, where both parties are involved in the risk, or the Muskaraka, where the risk is shared. Under asset financing, this is where a bank would buy an item, an asset, mark it up as a profit, and resell it to a buyer on installments. A salam is a loan that's made out for crops. The bank is essentially buying a crop that's going to be delivered at a future date. And ijara leasing is when the bank buys an item, someone leases it or rents it, and then it's returned at the end of the lease. Under Islam, there are also bonds. They're called sukuk. They have a special nature. They're not debt, but actually equity financing. And takaful is an insurance that's structured that allows individuals to create an insurance pool and share the risk under that. Okay, in terms of the future, there once again are different viewpoints and interpretations of Islamic law and how Sharia is applied to that. There's no uniform consensus. There are 5 different schools of thought, and these schools are developing new interpretations as new financial instruments are created. Okay, chapter 29 on unemployment. Unemployment let's start and think about the Saudi situation here with our labor force. I've set up a table here. The total population in Saudi Arabia is about 30 million. Of that, about 10 million are non-Saudis. That would leave about 20 million Saudis. Of those Saudis, the adult population is a population of about 15 and older. There are about 11 million that fall into that category. Of those, about 6 million are not in the labor force. These are either, we'll talk about what you would have to be in order to be considered not in the labor force. What that leaves us, though, is in the labor force about 5 million. So we take the adult population, split it into 2 groups. You're either in the labor force or you're not in the labor force. Once we've done that, we can calculate the labor force participation rate. So in this case, it'd be 5 million divided by 11 million, or about 45%. About 45% of the adult population are members of the labor force. Now, we split the labor force into 2 separate groups. Those are currently employed and those that are unemployed. In this case, there are about 4.4 million of that 5 million that are currently employed, and about 600,000 are unemployed. The unemployment rate is the 600,000 divided by the size of the labor force. So it'll be 600,000 divided by 5 million. So we have approximately 12% of the Saudis in Saudi Arabia that are currently unemployed. All right, employed are paid employees, those who work in their own business. Unpaid workers in a family business, part-time or full-time workers are considered employed. And those that have a job but are temporarily absent. Unemployed are those who are not employed but are available to work, someone who's tried to find a job in the last 4 weeks, or someone who's waiting to be recalled from a layoff. You might ask, what is someone who has been looking for a job for more than 4 weeks? We actually categorize them into a different group called discouraged workers, people who would like to work but have given up looking for a job. To be considered not in the labor force, you're not currently employed or unemployed. You might be a discouraged worker. Full-time students are not in the labor force. Homemakers are not in the labor force. And retirees are not in the labor force. All right, the unemployment rate is simply the percentage of the labor force that is currently unemployed, that falls in that unemployed category. All right. Couple of comparisons there. Saudi's about 12.2 unemployment. The U.S. is about 7.9. China's about 4.1. The participation rate in Saudi Arabia is about 45%. The U.S. it's 63%, and in China it's about 74%. Remember, the unemployment rate in Saudi for Saudi citizens about 12%, and the participation rate's about 45%. Okay, the natural rate of unemployment is simply the normal rate of unemployment around which the unemployment rate fluctuates or goes up and down around. A cyclical unemployment situation occurs when you have a significant deviation of unemployment from its natural rate. The problems with calculating the unemployment, we can overstate the unemployment when We don't count those who are working but are working for cash, so they don't show up as employed. We can understate the employment because the discouraged workers actually are no longer in the labor pool, so our unemployment rate might be understated due to this situation. All right, unemployment, there are three types of unemployment: frictional, seasonal, and structural. Under frictional, it's just simply somebody that's trying to find another job that they have the skills and ability for, and there is current demand for that skill. Seasonal unemployment is something that unemployment changes depending on the time of year. Structural unemployment is where you just have too many workers looking for a job, or there's no longer demand for those skills, so they have to develop new skills, some new human capital in order to be employable in the future. Okay, we also understand that there's this creative destruction process, that about 10% of the jobs become obsolete each year, and we have 10% of our job pool that actually are new jobs that are created each year. So this creative destruction is actually part of increasing productivity, where we move people into higher and higher valued in more complex jobs. Unemployment insurance is a government program to provide income when workers become unemployed. Economists recognize that unemployment insurance could have some unintended consequence because it creates a moral hazard or a temptation for people to stay on unemployment instead of searching for a job. It may prolong how long someone's going to be unemployed. Question is, why are wages maybe too high and we do have employment? There are three reasons: minimum wage laws, unions, and efficiency wages. Let's look at minimum wage laws first. Under minimum wage, the government sets a minimum wage that can legally be paid. If we chart this, there's the demand and supply at market equilibrium. We'd have a wage of $2,000 and we'd have 30 workers if the government were to step in, and also we'd have no unemployment. If the government were to step in and impose a minimum wage of 3,000 reals, we note here that there's a separation now between supply and demand. The quantity supplied would be 40 and the quantity demanded would only be 20. We would have a surplus. We'd have 40 workers that would want the job, but only 20 workers that would be employed. That there's only demand for 20 workers at that new wage rate. Minimum wage, essentially 20 of the workers would get a raise, 10 of the workers would lose their job, and we'd have 10 new unemployed workers. So economists tend to look at the minimum wage as being a loss on the economy because of these unemployment situations that occur. All right, efficiency wages are simply why would someone be paid such a high rate. There are really three things. We typically see higher wages make more productive employees. In this example, we have 2 employees. The wage rate is different, but what really counts is their productivity rate. Take a look at that chart. Make sure you understand who's the most productive employee here and who's paid the most. Okay, 4 reasons for efficiency wages. Those who are paid higher tend to be more healthy because they have more disposable income to spend on health care. Lower turnover. They don't have a tendency to go out and try to find a new job. They tend to be a higher quality employee, their work, and they also tend to expend more effort. All right, well, this is the quick review for the 3 chapters. Hope you all do well on the exam. Thank you.